It's lovely to see you all gathering in this space. Thank you for being here. And some of you I know Kythe well, and in particular, our board knows Kythe well because Kythe was
Hello.
on our board for a while, and we're so grateful for that connection. And for some of you, maybe this is your first time getting to delve into the beautiful offerings of Kythe, and you will know her by the end of this time together. So, friends, if you would put yourselves on mute, and we'd love to invite you to share in the chat where you're coming from in this world and what lands and waters know you well and who you honor where you are. And feel free to use the chat, and we will be interacting a little bit as Kythe leads us. But first of all, Kythe, to you, welcome back.
Oh,
We're so glad to have you here to lead us in this time together.
oh, I'm so
I'm just going to
grateful
hold up
to be
the
here.
two beautiful books that I have by my side of Kythe.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Margaret, and thank you so much to Interfaith Alignment and for all of you for making time for this session. Um, Welcome, and it's such a joy to be here with you. Before we begin, I'm so much hoping that this can be interactive and this can be something that we are all doing and sharing together. So I'm, equally, if not more, interested in all of you. So I'm going to invite some participation if you feel comfortable with it. And before we begin, I'd like to invite us all into a moment of arrival. So wherever you are joining from today, simply place your feet on the floor and take a slow breath. Leave aside everything that you've had to deal with so far today and take another slow breath. Begin to notice the room around you and the people who are gathered here. Some of you know each other, some of you don't. There are people from many different parts of the world and different traditions, different countries, vastly different histories and languages, different understandings of what we might call God. And yet we're all here because something in us continues to ask questions about meaning. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a massive downpour happening in the window beside me that just started when I said that. So I'm about an hour and a half outside of Philadelphia. And yeah, I'm outside at the shrine of the Sufi teacher that I've been studying with, and it's pouring rain. So I'm going to take that as a rain of grace. So we've all been asking questions about meaning and truth and beauty and love and what we can do at this moment in the world, what it means to be here at this moment and to live a fully human life. So thank you for bringing all of your questions with you today. I would like to begin with a dream. Many years ago, I dreamed that thousands of birds made entirely of light were crossing a vast expanse of the night sky. These were not ordinary birds. Each one seemed to carry something, a message or a prayer or a question or a fragment of a moment or of an intelligence. The sky itself felt alive, and the birds were moving together in these great spirals and currents through the dark, like a migration or a ceremony or a language. And when I woke, I had this strange feeling that this dream was not symbolic, but rather a kind of sign, as though I had been shown something. But at the time, I didn't understand what that would be. Years later, I encountered the medieval Sufi poem Conference of the Birds, and I founded Vision Lab. And years later, I would begin to gather different artists and scholars, contemplatives, activists, healers, scientists, and seekers into a community. But this dream really came first. The dream, as I'm sure you've experienced yourselves, the dream always comes first. And hidden inside a dream, any of us could be the dreamer, was a question that has followed me throughout my life, which is how do human beings transform? How do we change? How do we evolve? Um, and you look back on your life and you see these moments of profound transformation. And it's not a matter of, improvement or optimization. It's not to become more productive, but but a kind of transformation that's about how to become more awake and more compassionate and more courageous and more capable of love and of loving each other, more capable of responding to suffering. And how is it that we become who we truly are? These are the questions that have obsessed me, and probably many of you too. But everything I have done as a poet, an artist, a scholar, a teacher, and a community builder has really emerged from this real need, as a seeker, just to understand this not only on a personal level, but as a collective question. So at this moment, I know I've started to raise the theme of birds, and that will continue. And so I thought we could do something a little bit playful in this session. I'm wanting to balance, a couple of playful and interactive elements with some of the more serious themes. But I was thinking that we could experiment with, think about a bird that you might have a special relationship with, a particular bird that you feel an affinity with. And if you feel like it, change your name on the screen to this bird so that we could become a collective of birds for a moment here. Um, and I would love, meanwhile, to hear from you in the chat or simply silently to yourself. I'm curious about your own response to this question, and this could even be a spark for later reflection too. But what has most transformed you in your life so far? A friendship, a loss, a love, a child, a moment of grace, a teacher, a spiritual practice? So I want to just take a moment. Feel free to drop any of these thoughts into the chat. Um, but what has really most transformed you? And we'll have about 60 seconds of silence. So the bird of transformation is the phoenix. And several years ago, during the height of the pandemic, my poetry collection, Firebird, which is kind of the Russian version, as it were, of the phoenix, which occurs, interestingly enough, in almost every tradition around the world. There's some kind of version of this flaming bird that sets itself on fire and then is reborn. So a kind of symbol of not only transformation, but regeneration. And that's a symbol and a set of meanings that has been really central to my life. When people ask me what this book of poetry is about, I usually say it's a book about trauma or healing, spiritual awakening, and this phoenix. But that answer is not entirely true, or maybe partially true. The deeper truth is that I wrote Firebird because I really wanted to understand whether healing was possible. I wanted to understand how a human being continues after life-shattering experiences, how suffering enters the body, how memory lives in the body, how violence lives in the body, and how transformation might also live there and emerge from devastation. So this book emerged from a question, which is, what if trauma and spiritual awakening are not entirely separate experiences? What if both of them involve the collapse of a world? And what if both require us to become someone we cannot yet imagine, where our life is completely burnt down to the ground, and in order to continue, we have to become someone we haven't yet known? So that was my question at the center of this book. And also at the center of this book is a figure I call the burning girl. So she is a real person. She's also several real people and moments, and she's also myself. And perhaps she's also every person who has ever found themselves standing in the ashes of their life, of a life they did not choose, that was sort of thrust upon them, a burning that you did not choose and that you had to somehow survive. Throughout the book, she keeps leaving. She runs away from home. She walks barefoot into the snow. This teenager walks through impossible landscapes. She disappears. She returns again and again, like the phoenix. And at first, I thought I was writing about my own life, but gradually I realized that I was writing about many lives. And a lot of the different girls that I had worked with, I was, at one point working in a teenage homeless shelter. Another point, I was working in a prison with women who were there for life. There have been many different populations of people that I have been honored to learn from and to hear a lot of these stories. And there began to be so many overlaps. So this burning girl became a kind of collective figure, and she carried within her stories of homelessness and abuse and illness, of ecological devastation, the forests that were burning on the West Coast, loneliness, grief, and survival. So she became this mythic figure made of many bodies and many stories, a single voice carrying so much. And this really changed and expanded the book because I really began to understand that trauma is never merely personal, but that our lives are so deeply entangled. The burning forest and the burning body belong to the same world. And domestic violence, ecological devastation, they're belonging to the same world. Political hypocrisy and spiritual exhaustion belong to the same world. And the suffering of one person is never entirely separate from others, the suffering of others. But there's something else that is also true, which is that healing is also not separate. Healing is completely entangled, and love is completely entangled. Beauty is enmeshed with all of our lives, just as transformation is. And our lives, far from being merely a structural inequality, there's a whole language that is a language of structuralism, and that is so meaningful. But I really wanted to also speak about the very intimate, often unheard ways in which our own lives speak to one another in ways that are sensitive to this shared, devastation and shared healing in ways that exceed explanation, that we can really come to know each other more deeply than we imagine. So, one of the discoveries that emerged was that the book had become something very much stranger than a collection of poems, because so much of it was involved with my own training in Sufism. It became a kind of mystical training manual for how our lives are very subtly interconnected. And I learned a lot from this book. I became very deeply immersed in the poetry of the great Sufi mystics, especially Fariduddin Attar and Jalal al-Din Muhammad Rumi. I studied them in depth. I was fascinated by the way they used ordinary human experiences, such as love or heartbreak or friendship or bewilderment or longing, even in the 1200s and 1300s, the same emotions and experiences that we have now. And they used these in their poems as vehicles for spiritual transformation. In their poetry, a lover searching for the beloved is also the soul searching for God. And a journey across a desert is also a journey through consciousness and the limitations of contemporary life, the desert of contemporary life. It's also a journey through consciousness. A bird searching for the simorgh, the phoenix in Persian myth, is also a human being, right? Searching for their deepest self. And I realized that I was doing something similar. The homeless teenager in this book became a kind of contemporary version of a wandering dervish, and trauma became a kind of a spiritual crossroads. Everything entered myth, so that loss became a space of initiation, and the personal story welcomed all these other stories and finally became a myth. At the same time, I found myself increasingly drawn to the apophatic tradition, to the mystics who insist that the deepest truths cannot finally be named. So these are mystics that you may all be familiar with, such as Meister Eckhart or Marguerite Porete, Hadovich, writers who understood that there comes a point when language reaches its limit. And when language reaches its limit, that's where mystery begins, which is also, I would argue, where poetry begins, a kind of doorway or threshold, a journey through fire. So again and again, we lose the life we thought we were living, and we're asked to begin again. And we discover that an ending is actually secretly a kind of threshold. And so all of us, I think, have in some way experienced this. It's so fundamental to human experience and human consciousness. And I would like to read a poem from this book. In this poem, it's called Mattress Under an Overpass. And I also would like to play a video that I made that was sort of a poetry ritual of sorts. I dragged my mattress from my bed at this time when I wrote the poem um, out onto the sand on Cape Cod, and I set it ablaze, and I created a ritual around this. Again, it's called Mattress Under an Overpass, and it's about this burning girl, this runaway teenager who has found a mattress that's just been left, and she's wondering if that's a place for her because nobody else wants it. And she's imagining just setting this mattress and everything kind of on fire. So it's sort of a private poetry ritual, you would say. She could douse it with a gallon of lighted fluid, light the match. If she could watch like this always, always to watch, never to enter, never to feel the brightness catch and the fabric searing. Look, how the mattress holds everything the body refuses to keep inside: leak, stain, spot, and mark, but nothing belongs to it. How will she hold her life if she cannot hold this? The exhausting wheel of wounding and healing burns. Look inside the mattress. The suffering burns. The desire to heal again through suffering burns. I don't want to feel, but how could I bear not feeling? How will she hold herself if she cannot hold this? The exhausting wheel of wounding and healing burns. Look inside the mattress. The suffering burns. The desire to heal again through suffering burns. I don't want to feel, but how could I bear not feeling? She's been floating for years, hovering somewhere above her body, I said. Is this the bed she must enter? Is this where she was conceived, in a bed of fire? Wings lifting up, mouth open, calling over the gauze of smoke, the dim orange hum coming and going over them. Did she know what knowing is? As the bed burned from the outside in, black flakes oranging at the edges, then breaking off in pieces to spark out on the sand. Which was the blaze that burned through the outer husk of her? Which seared into the mattress, into every fiber of tissue and flesh, to burn away what she was, what she meant to become? There, where the wound is open, utterly still in its need, so completely still in hunger, as the sway of yellows swell and fall over it, swell and fall. The skin of eyelids covering the whole of a body, eyelids all flickering, ready to exist along the whole horizon of its being, ready to exist, a unified weeping like the emergence of the soul. What do the dead want from us? What is the light of the inside? Light meeting light, like mirror meeting fire. The body of eyes everywhere, a joyful sobbing everywhere, a crackling wash of cries, where the glowing coals emerge, just at the center of the fluff of ash and blackened fabric. Last night, I felt the flames climb in at last to the inner core. They found the wire mesh of the mattress twisted in its skeleton of light, its body of glowing gold in the black. Joy or anguish, to be born in fire, in the elemental moment, to feel the flames coursing over my bones, caressing every cell with light, until at last the fire bent down low over the rib cage and reached in. My shattered chest was coiled like wire, heart melted down to a single pore. Then that heart melted into the form of liquid pearl, which wobbled, flowed over and rolled, drop by drop, to shatter into resplendences of grace, scattered as seeds of life and as light rays. Okay. Thank you. I want to drop a couple questions into the chat here because these are questions that, I've really been reflecting on so much, and I'm really just wondering how you all respond to them. Maybe there's something I can learn from your own reflection on them. I thought we could just have a couple of minutes of chat talking about them. Looking back on your own life, can you identify a journey you never would have chosen, but that changed you in ways you didn't realize you would be grateful for later? Maybe related to that, what experience in your life has most transformed your understanding of love? I know these are big questions, but I'm wondering if anybody feels bold or maybe wanted to just drop a thought into the chat, these, if they're useful to think about. But this is one that has been such a profound one to me. Where have you discovered that your own story, this story that we're constantly making up about our own lives, is not only my story? So that was such a profound, transformative moment for this book. This is beautiful. Reading John O'Donohue, I love him too. His book Anamkara awoke something that broke and changed me. I totally had that experience when I read that too. Yeah, becoming clean and sober through a 12-step community. All of these are such, it's just like the tip of each of these experiences, but it's like each of them is something to be so grateful for, these moments of being alive.
Not to interrupt you, but I'm
Sure.
I've been exploring so much in the last few years of my life how much my parents' immigration, their journey to this land from their homeland has affected my life
Mm,
and the life of my children. And I see that in both of your questions because they took a journey that they were not
chosen.
particularly wanting to have taken. And um, my generation and my children's generation, we are grateful that they did that and for where we are, but we also feel that our story is not just our story, it is their story for having made that journey
Mm,
that they
mm.
really want to make.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this. And now there are these amazing things in the chat. The journey with cancer and the care and encouragement of family and friends and my medical team who brought me through. So all of these are such deeply profound moments. Finding the dances of universal peace. So, so, so special, all of these. So we can open up more and more. I wanted to share one other thing with you that's kind of the second piece of this presentation, which is that as I finished writing Firebird, and maybe some of you also have experiences with writing or working on a really long project, I realized something really unexpected, which is that this book, which had begun as an attempt to understand individual suffering, ended up teaching me something completely different, which is that transformation is not individual and that we become ourselves together, and that these deepest moments of change in my life arrived through relationships, through teachers and friendships and artistic collaborations and spiritual communities, through people who were willing to accompany one another through uncertain times like the one that we're in. And so then I have a question, which is if our culture is facing these crises, which it is now, of fragmentation and loneliness and political malfeasance and ecological devastation, political polarization and spiritual exhaustion, compassion fatigue. What kinds of communities do we need now? What can reawaken this spirit of collectivity? what are these spaces where artists and scholars and contemplative spiritual practitioners of different kinds, healers and visionaries, can actually begin to think together, not in conventional ways, but nothing having to do with a commercialized market or defending different disciplinary fields, but actually to genuinely think together and support each other and create together and practice together and really, really sit with these difficult questions that we're all facing now. And so when I was really first struggling with that question after writing this book, I was at Harvard Divinity School at the time, and the question began as a series of conversations. So I just sort of invited everyone I thought would be interested in that conversation to talk together about it. And it became this group called Vision Lab, which is now, just as Margaret has created alignment, a kind of international community of artists, scholars, all these different people, filmmakers, spiritual practitioners, musicians, activists, poets. But when people ask me what Vision Lab actually is, I find myself saying it's not a conference or a platform. It's more difficult to describe. And it's actually hoping to be a kind of sustained place where artistic practice and spiritual life and scholarship are brought together in genuine relationship, where people can develop work together that matters over time and can find many different communities and spaces in which to exist and affect, these different communities all over the world because people are scattered all over the world, but yet finding this sort of unusual new form of community. So, one recent participant described it as a continuation of conversations I didn't want to end. Yeah, where these friendships can deepen. So, what does this actually look like? It looks like an artist who's in the Philippines exploring healing performances in response to ecological precarity and historical trauma, or a researcher in Southern Europe working with communities surrounding one of the continent's last rivers, free-flowing rivers, or artists developing responses to climate grief, or scholars exploring contemplative traditions, poets who are writing into questions about belonging, or healers, musicians, activists, all experimenting with new forms, which are newly possible now. And so all of this kind of led to these questions about collective flourishing in Vision Lab. And the most ambitious project that we have taken on so far is called Conference of the Birds. And that's sort of why I asked you maybe to sort of take on the character of a bird just as a kind of funny and curious exercise here. So if you do feel inspired, you could become one of the birds for a moment. Um, but this Conference of the Birds began, kind of inspired by one of the great masterpieces of world spirituality, which is Farid Uddin Attar's 12th century Sufi Persian poem called the Mantik al-Tair, Conference of the Birds. Some of you may already know the story, but it's a wonderful story, and there's actually a tremendous kind of graphic novel version of it by Peter Sis, a Czechoslovakian artist from the Czech Republic. So all the birds of the world, they're gathering because their forest is threatened. Their world is in a crisis. So you can see the immediate connection. They no longer know how to live and they no longer know who they are. And so they turn around to each other and finally they sort of hit upon the hoopoe bird, which is supposedly the wise messenger bird of King Solomon, who tells them that they must journey together in search of the Simorgh, who is a kind of Persian phoenix, the mysterious, enlightened bird that dwells beyond 7 valleys on the mystical mountain of Kythe. Immediately, the birds start making excuses. as to why they cannot start on this voyage together. One bird is attached to comfort, another to certainty, another to grief, another to status, another to fear. The birds sound remarkably human, yet eventually they begin this journey together across 7 valleys, across the valleys of bewilderment and loss and longing and annihilation. Many of them turn back or drop off. Many of them perish. And only 30 birds finally arrive. And there they discover this great secret at the top of the mountain of Kythe, which is that they look into a pool of water that is sitting close to the top of the mountain. And they do, in fact, see the Simorgh. But there's a sort of a sly turn of phrase here in Persian, in Farsi, which is that Simorgh, this phoenix sort of divinity, enlightened being that they have been seeking, is also themselves the 30 birds, because Sai is 30 and Morg is birds. So what they find is not an individual, master or enlightened being who can help them, but what they find is the collective self. The name Simorgh, that means 30 birds, appears as a mirror. The divine appears as a mirror of everything in existence, their own 30 selves. And they look into that mirror and they finally see who they are. I've always loved that image because it suggests that enlightenment is not something that's possessed or achieved or owned, but something revealed through relationship and this collective transformation through the journey itself. And so during the pandemic, ironically enough, there were 30 artists all over the world that were a part of this Vision Lab experiment when so many of us were frightened and isolated and grieving and really uncertain about the future, which in many ways is being replicated in different ways right now. So Vision Lab decided to recreate Attar's journey as a kind of living experiment where all these artists and poets and musicians and filmmakers and scholars and spiritual practitioners and activists and healers collaborated across continents and created this evolving ecosystem of projects of poetry and film and music and dance and installation and social practice and ritual and experimental forms also. Each one of them was connected to the others, like birds flying in formation, like a kind of living ecology of the imagination. And so we were asking each other these questions. How do human beings transform? How do communities transform? And there was so much imagination in the room. All the projects are completely different from each other. Some of them live on the website, some of them were screened or exhibited or published in different parts of the world. And so then their life was continued into other communities. A lot of them are about ecological crisis or racial injustice, or collective grief that is, a kind of transformation. So the answer wasn't singular, it wasn't theoretical, it wasn't, it was actually in the community itself and in the journey and in the practice, in the flock, in the ongoing conference of the birds. And that actually continues. That continues very much in the work that we're doing now in terms of salons, where we're juxtaposing and inviting two different people to speak and then opening up conversations and creating these deeper spaces of collective work called dream incubations. And so I just wanted to just share a little bit of this website and sort of share a little bit about a couple of pieces from this project. Margaret, there's a small ritual piece about the Firebird that was done in Death Valley, actually, in California, and several Vision Lab people got together and worked on it. So somebody did the sound from across, a continent from Mexico, and somebody else did the performance in California, and somebody else edited the film. I wrote the performance ritual. So, this is just something that was kind of invented with all of us, and it's more of a sort of brief symbolic moment of the Firebird sort of coming into a space of transformation. Thank you so much, Margaret. Um, and I just sort of finally wanted to just show you, how diverse all these projects were and how many people were involved in all these collaborations across places and times. This in the back is a wonderful representation of this mountain of calf, but there were projects that were deeply political, like James Venable created a new social movement called I Am You. And he's a minister. And so he gave a number of sermons about that movement. There were video interviews. There was an artist who created woodblock prints of the phoenix, which then people all over the world copied and pasted up kind of as a beautiful act of graffiti in different cities around the world in order to kind of create this collective, um, fluorescence of the phoenix. So these sort of images of the phoenix and of awakening were appearing around the world. That was really fun. And there were, let's see, there was a graphic novel. There was the video poem I showed you. There was a lucid dreaming project, which was really trying to help people dream about regeneration, the phoenix as a symbol of different ways to regenerate in all kinds of situations. So they were collecting dreams and offering dream prompts to the whole community and their communities around the world. There was a flamenco dance inside a burnt out tree. Um, there was, gosh, the performer in the film that you just saw. It was so amazing how the same image of the phoenix would have a vastly different meaning for everyone who was involved in collaborating. And so that particular performer, Camila, uh, did not tell us until after the performance and the film was finished that they were secretly using that ritual as a very, very personal ritual, and it was the last time they experienced having breasts. So literally the day after the filming of that ritual, they began, a very intense transition from being a female identified person to being a male identified person. So it's really incredible because that wouldn't have even occurred to me as one of the meanings of the phoenix in my own life, and somebody else has their own deeply personal relationship with it. So it was really profound in so many ways to share and to collaborate. There were different art pieces and albums and experimental lectures and films. So you can investigate this more if you'd like. Each one of these projects, if you click onto it, it opens up to interviews with the creators. And, some of the projects are online. Um, a couple of them, um, yeah, a couple of them have passwords, but they're all just available on the website if you wanted to investigate all of that more. And then I'm just also hoping we can talk a little bit at the end of this hour. So I've said pretty much everything I wanted to say, and what I would just love to do is bring this back around to the birds and offer a moment of vocalization to end this. So just as, I've been really trying to speak about the ways in which poetry and mysticism and this sort of deep inner training and how lives are so deeply connected to each other, underneath these social structures and systemic systems that are so damaging to our world. But there are subtle, subtle interconnections. And this is what, artists working together can offer a glimpse of. This is what spiritual practitioners in communities that are so wide-ranging, like alignment, can offer a glimpse of. This is the kind of thing that, that Vision Lab has been really, working to develop. So I'm just curious about, your reactions, maybe your own experiences. There are some amazing sort of glimpses of your beautiful lives in the chat. And just anything that sort of like sparked you a little bit here, I would love to just hear where you're going with these ideas or with this work. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share, and I hope something of that's, that I offered would be of use in your lives and just kind of, lead you into a moment of thoughtfulness around some of these questions.
Okay, it's so beautiful. Thank you. What
Thank
a
you.
project. The breadth of this project is just breathtaking. And these are all the people that we want leading our world, right? You talk about art and poetry in particular as a technology for transformation,
Hmm.
creating these communities wherever we are in whatever our art form is. And this preacher doing a series of sermons as his art form, just so
Hmm.
inspiring.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
my friends, I'm going to turn off the recording so that maybe you feel more comfortable just in sharing a little openly here.